Back in 1950s, Iran was a democratic country under monarch Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, who appointed Mohammad Mossadegh as prime minister after the Majlis, the Iranian parliament, nominated the latter by a vote of 79 to 12. When Mossadegh in 1951 nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company to free his country from the clutches of foreign interference, Britain, along with America's CIA, decided to overthrow the Mossadegh government to protect its colonial-era financial interests. Intelligence agencies were given enormous amounts of money to buy opposition leaders, street gangs, press, religious leaders, and other influential figures. What was the role of the publicly funded independent broadcaster BBC in this 1953 Iranian coup d'etat? In a documentary, Cinematograph, aired on 18th of August 2011, on the anniversary of the coup, BBC admitted for the first time to the role of BBC Persian Radio as the propaganda arm of the British government in Iran. The Cinematograph narrator said, "The British government used the BBC Persian Radio for advancing its propaganda against Mossadegh, and anti-Mossadegh material were repeatedly aired on the radio channel to the extent that Iranian staff at the BBC Persian Radio went on strike to protest the move." The documentary quoted a 21st of July 1951 classified document in which a Foreign Office official thanked the British ambassador for his proposals that were precisely followed by the BBC Persian Radio to strengthen its propaganda against Mossadegh. The BBC had already made most of the points which you listed, but they were very glad to have an indication from you of what was likely to be most effective and will arrange their programme accordingly. We should also avoid direct attacks on the ruling classes, since it seems probable that we may want to deal with a government drawn from those classes should Mossadegh fall. In his review to a book, BBC Persian Service, the BBC and British Interests in Iran, preeminent historian of modern Iran, Professor Ervand Abrahamian writes, "As for the CIA M16 coup of 1953, the British government and the BBC were equally collaborative. The latter, throughout the crisis, loudly echoed the former's line that nationalization of the oil industry would be disastrous for Iran, that it would financially bankrupt the government, that the country would not have the technical know-how to run the industry, and that Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh had refused a series of fair and just offers for compromise." After the overthrow of Mossadegh, the BBC continued to echo the official line that there had been no military coup, but a spontaneous revolt against a dictatorial regime. Abrahamian also writes, even though the book details the close links between the government and the BBC during the crisis, it overlooks one major egregious case. Throughout the crisis, the Foreign Office and the British ambassador explicitly forbade the BBC to send to Tehran any reporters sympathetic to Iran. Professor Elwell Sutton was explicitly blacklisted despite his outstanding expertise. The British Embassy denounced him as anti-colonial and anti-British. In his book, All the Shah's Men, An American Coup and the Roots of Middle East Terror, a former New York Times correspondent, Stephen Kinzer, claims that BBC was at times even directly used in the operations by sending coded messages to the coup plotters. His book is based on documents and internal CIA reports that have now been declassified. So, can this BBC documentary on Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi also be a propaganda piece? Maybe not by British government, but others. Here's what American administration thinks about the documentary.
Not familiar with the documentary you're referring to. I am very familiar with the shared values that connect the United States and India. I don't think about domestic politics, and neither does anyone.
And here's what British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has to say.
Clear and long-standing and hasn't changed. Of course, we don't tolerate persecution where it appears anywhere, but I'm not sure I agree at all with the characterization.
What has BBC to say about this documentary? The BBC claims that the documentary was rigorously researched and that a wide range of voices, witnesses and experts were approached, and they have featured a range of opinions, including responses from people in the BJP. In our next episode, we explore another rigorously researched documentary that got BBC to return the prestigious Royal Television Society Award.